Now, you saw the videos that we sent to you. Why is America, or why do people have the impression that America is preoccupied with showing its power and blowing things up? I mean, what message is that send to the people, to us domestically, even though, let me say that we all love America?
I was overseas as an airman in 1972 and 3 and 4 in the aftermath of the escalation of the Vietnam conflict, and saw the damage that that activity was doing to my credibility as an American to do anything except speak as an airman. I could not speak as a person that cared about Turkey, that cared about their democracy movement, which at that time was moving towards communism. And people were blowing things up in Istanbul, trying to change the government, and the prime minister was hung because he got a little too liberal. But the bottom line is that that power projected in an inhumane fashion destroys any credibility that anybody has to stand on moral grounds. So it damaged our international prestige hugely. We have gone back and forth in different times being true leaders of world morality, especially when it comes to protecting people, protecting innocent people in terms of laws and things like that. But the bottom line is that we project individually. You know, I could do many things in Turkey versus as a volunteer airman and later a State Department official to change things. I turned upside down the governing body of the organization that I worked for in terms of the Turkish American Association, and was hated by a lot of the business people who had supported it, because I didn't see any problem with a whole pile of young people coming in, gaining membership and taking over board positions. That's kind of what we ought to do. If it's not doing the right thing, then somebody will take over. So that was just one tiny piece of what I watched. But ultimately, when it comes to contrived wars, contrived American imperialism, especially when that is contrived by rich people who want to keep their power, keep their oil, keep their banks, very little of that has changed. You know, when you look at the 30s and the economic power of Germany and Nazism, and how very few people expressed opposition in Germany to policies of people that were saving them economically. Well, how were they saving them? They were building weapons, borrowing money, and confiscating billions of dollars. Russia, you know, the fall of communism led to essentially the rise of oligarchical capitalism. And I think I'd rather have communism. Growing up, you know, in Cherubusco, Indiana, as a Catholic white boy, I was certainly a member of a minority. But one person that just dazzled me was Malcolm X. And I really became sort of a soul follower of Malcolm X at that time. But I wasn't sure why, other than he said by any means necessary. And I teach it now. In other words, if you are organized, if you have an organization, take power. Power isn't given to you. You take it. And you can only believe that you have the power. Now in Texas, the Supreme Court changed one part of the findings in the civil rights law related to congressional reapportionment and how that activity was causing people not to be represented. And they essentially left that alone. In other words, the federal civil rights law was no longer to be a part of apportionment findings. Indiana's voter registration law was found constitutional when it's a blatant attempt to restrict voters to elite. It's meant to push poor people out. Now, I always told people that you have to remember that laws are passed by majorities. And if you have a majority Christian, Caucasian, in Africa, black majority passing the laws, then by God, that's what you get. You get the laws of those in power. And there's only one alternative, and that is disobey the law or take over the government. And that can be done in many, many fashions. It's as we celebrate Little Turtle. The inhumanity of the colonization in America was largely visited on the poor and the Native Americans. But it wasn't like they didn't have plenty of experiences to go by, in Africa, Europe, and Asia. In other words, they already knew how to oppress people. They've been doing it for thousands of years. But Little Turtle, again, showed the pride of a local, prideful leader.
How do we peacefully get beyond that of this supremacist attitude of subjugating everybody? And first of all, how do we make sure that everybody knows that they're being subjugated, as opposed to pointing to one group saying that that you're the one who's being kicked in the rear end, when they're being kicked too, and everybody's being kicked except for a certain small few?
Well, this statement, those of our kind, that always pisses me off, because that's me, or not me. And when I think of my youth and, growing up in a big, poor Catholic family in little Cherubusco, there's two ways out of that. Number one, college. Number two, a job. But as an angry young man, I had a little trouble with that, because I tended to push, and that tended to piss people off, because it wasn't my class to be doing what I thought I ought to be doing. And, there's the cheerleaders and the jocks that led the school. I wasn't one of them, but I wanted to be of power. And, where you, the discrimination that I felt as a white person was largely because of poverty. And that I was an uppity guy. I wanted beyond my measure, because I thought I should go after it. And this is, where the civil rights issue, to me, I've always been a civil rightist, but I didn't know it. Because, when someone gets their rights, or rather, when someone takes their rights, two things happen. Number one, people are amazed often. And number two, then you begin to believe that you have them. And, when I look at Frost, and now that Eric is in Frost regularly, and people talk about Eric and me and others who are advocates and push hard sometimes against the power structure, what I've learned is that if I really disagree with you, and you really disagree with me, it's largely because we haven't walked in each other's shoes. And you know, I cannot know someone else's pain or joy unless I am that person. But you know, the whole issue of civil rights was to me an epiphany in that people all over the world have always been fighting for what they believe to be their rights, often their kids, the next meal, the next job. And you know, fighters often are the ones that end up paying for that. And this is where I think too many times we go along to get along. And you know, my parents said, you know, don't push on this one. Don't push. My wife says, don't push on this. Fellow workers, don't push on this. And it was something that to me was a lifetime of pushing. And that's the way I got what I got that I believe in. I'm not rich, don't ever anticipate. But you know, there are certain areas where this little guy from northern Allen County can have the ear of the Senate President pro tem. Not because I have any money, but because I have credibility. And when I say something in a subject that I know about, and he knows it, he knows I'm speaking the truth. Anybody can have that power, unless you don't believe it. And you know, the issue of white discrimination is everywhere. It happens to, you know, all colors. But when it comes to, I'm not sure that we taught the world about slavery. I think there may be something in us. And it goes back to some recent studies that I've done on Cro-Magnon versus Neanderthal, and how those two strains of humanity separated, competed, and ultimately one died. And it's like, it's maybe it's part of us, and you know, we're the good angels. But I don't think we have done a very good job of teaching the Chinese the evil of oppression and slavery. They have done a really good job of teaching some of us how it wins. In other words, you have, you know, a Republican city council that gets rid of collective bargaining for workers. Baffling, just baffling that, you know, this group of Republicans does not understand that they are the ones that cause the problems with the union, because only the people with power can cause the problems. It's not the union workers. It's pissant politicians that gave them something they shouldn't have given them when they had the power to say no. But to tell workers they cannot organize and they will not recognize their organization is, to me, pure un-American. Just, it's fascism. So I see civil rights as everyone's responsibility. And you know, if the first time that I was just absolutely overjoyed was when I saw my two sons show courage in the face of a trial. They showed courage. That is, in the words of Aung San Suu Kyi, you know, Dadishiba, have courage. And you know, I think so many times we do not teach people the courage of our parents and what they fought